In the depths of space, where ancient civilizations left their marks on forgotten worlds, humanity has learned that not everything that glitters is gold. Sometimes it's bait. And, sometimes, the hunter becomes the hunted in ways that defy every law of physics and logic known to the galaxy. Marcus Chen thought he'd found the score of a lifetime on Kepler 442b, a crystalline gem the size of his fist, pulsing with an inner light that seemed to whisper promises of wealth beyond imagination. But, the moment his fingers closed around it, something else stirred in the shadows of the ancient temple. Something that had been waiting. Something hungry. What Marcus didn't know was that humans possess a trait so rare, so impossible, that entire civilizations have built religions around it. A trait that makes them the most valuable prey in the universe. And, now, trapped in a temple older than human civilization, with a stone guardian that feeds on the impossible, Marcus is about to discover why humanity's greatest strength might also be their most dangerous weakness. The hunt has begun. But, who, exactly, is the predator? Marcus Chen's breath fogged the inside of his helmet as he stepped through the crumbling archway of the temple. The ancient structure rose from the jungle floor of Kepler 442b like a forgotten monument to gods whose names had been lost to time. Vines thick as his torso wrapped around pillars carved from some dark stone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The air recycler in his environmental suit hummed quietly, processing the alien atmosphere into something his human lungs could handle. "Command, this is Prospector 7, Marcus spoke into his comm unit, his voice echoing slightly in the vast chamber. "I've located the energy signature. It's definitely artificial, and it's strong. Whatever's in here, it's been active for a very long time." Static crackled in response before Commander Sarah Walsh's voice came through, tinged with the slight delay of interstellar communication. "Copy that, Marcus. Remember, you're there for geological samples, not archaeology. The Science Corps will want to examine any artifacts properly." Marcus grinned inside his helmet. The Science Corps could wait. He'd been prospecting on the outer rim for 15 years, scraping together enough credits to keep his ship running and his belly full. This was his chance at something bigger. The energy readings his ship had detected were off the charts, suggesting either advanced technology or some kind of natural phenomenon that could be worth millions to the right buyer. The temple floor was covered in intricate mosaics that depicted strange creatures Marcus couldn't identify. Some looked almost human, but wrong in subtle ways, too tall, with limbs that bent in impossible directions. Others were clearly alien, with multiple eyes and appendages that defied easy categorization. But what caught his attention was the consistent theme: all the creatures in the mosaics were running. Fleeing from something. Marcus activated his portable scanner and swept it across the walls. The device's screen lit up with readings that made his heart race. The stone itself contained trace amounts of rare earth elements worth a fortune, but that wasn't what made his pulse quicken. There was something else here, something his scanner couldn't quite classify. The energy signature was getting stronger as he moved deeper into the temple. The passage narrowed as he walked, forcing him to duck under progressively lower archways. The carvings on the walls grew more detailed and more disturbing. He saw images of creatures being consumed by something that looked like living stone. In one panel, a being that looked remarkably human stood before a towering figure made of the same dark material as the temple walls. The human figure was holding something in its outstretched hand, something that glowed with the same energy signature Marcus was tracking. "Weird," he muttered, running his gloved fingers over the carving. The stone was warm to the touch, which shouldn't have been possible. His suit's thermal sensors showed that the ambient temperature in the temple was only a few degrees above freezing, yet the walls radiated heat like they were alive. The passage opened into a circular chamber that took Marcus's breath away. The ceiling soared high above, disappearing into darkness that his suit's lights couldn't penetrate. Around the perimeter of the room stood statues, each one different but all carved from the same light-absorbing stone. They were positioned facing inward, toward the center of the chamber, where a raised dais held something that made Marcus's scanner go wild with activity. A gem. A crystalline structure the size of his fist, floating freely about 3 feet above the stone platform. It pulsed with an internal light that shifted through colors Marcus had never seen before, casting dancing shadows on the walls that seemed to move independently of the gem's rotation. The energy signature was so strong here that his scanner couldn't get a clear reading. Holy shit, Marcus breathed, forgetting about comm protocol entirely. This was it. This was the score he'd been dreaming of his entire career. A gem of this size and obvious power could set him up for life. He could retire to one of the core worlds, maybe even buy his own research station. He approached the dais carefully, his boots clicking on the stone floor in a rhythm that seemed to echo strangely in the chamber. The statues watched him with blank stone eyes, but Marcus barely noticed them. His attention was completely focused on the gem and the fortune it represented. As he got closer, he could see that it wasn't just floating, it was rotating slowly, each facet catching and refracting the light in mesmerizing patterns. Marcus pulled out his portable containment field generator, a piece of standard prospecting equipment designed to safely transport dangerous or valuable materials. The device hummed to life, projecting a shimmering barrier around the gem. But, the moment the field made contact with the crystal, something unexpected happened. The gem's light flared brighter, and the field generators sparked and died. Damn, Marcus cursed, checking his equipment. The containment field was completely fried. Whatever this gem was, it was more powerful than anything he'd encountered before. But that just made it more valuable. He'd have to transport it manually, which was risky but not impossible. His environmental suit had basic shielding against radiation and energy fields. He reached out slowly, his hand trembling slightly with anticipation. The gem seemed to pulse brighter as his fingers approached, as if it was responding to his presence. When his glove finally made contact with the crystal surface, everything changed. The moment Marcus touched the gem, a wave of sensation washed over him that had nothing to do with his physical senses. It was like suddenly being aware of dimensions his mind wasn't equipped to process. He could feel vast spaces extending in directions that didn't exist, and, somewhere in those impossible geometries, something ancient and hungry stirred to awareness. The gem's light exploded outward, filling the chamber with illumination that revealed details Marcus hadn't noticed before. The statues weren't just decorative, they were covered in the same intricate carvings as the walls, telling a story that made his blood run cold. They showed the stone figures coming to life, reaching out with impossible strength to grasp fleeing creatures. And, in every image, the creatures being hunted carried the same type of gem Marcus now held in his hand. Behind him, something that had been perfectly still for millennia began to move. The sound started as a low grinding, like massive stone blocks shifting against each other. Marcus spun around, still clutching the gem, and watched in horror as one of the statues stepped down from its pedestal. The thing was enormous, easily 8 feet tall and proportioned like a nightmare version of the human form. Its stone skin was covered in the same carvings as the walls, and, as it moved, those carvings began to glow with a sickly green light. What the hell? Marcus stumbled backward, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. The statue's eyes, which had been empty sockets moments before, now blazed with the same green fire as its markings. When it opened its mouth, Marcus could see that its throat extended down into darkness that seemed deeper than the statue's body should allow. The creature spoke, and its voice was the sound of grinding stone and whispered secrets. The words weren't in any language Marcus recognized, but somehow he understood their meaning. They bypassed his ears entirely and carved themselves directly into his consciousness. Finally, the statue said, its voice echoing from impossible depths. Another bearer of the light. Marcus raised his rifle with his free hand, though he doubted conventional weapons would be effective against animated stone. Stay back. I don't know what you are, but I'm armed. The statue tilted its head, the motion accompanied by the grinding sound of stone against stone. You carry what we hunger for, little flesh thing. The light that burns in your kind's essence. We have waited so long for another to claim the bait. Bait? Marcus's blood turned to ice. He looked down at the gem in his hand, its pulsing light now seeming sinister rather than beautiful. This was a trap? Clever, for food, the statue rumbled, taking another step forward. As it moved, Marcus could see that its feet weren't quite touching the ground. The creature floated slightly, held up by forces he couldn't understand. Your species is rare in this galaxy. Most flesh beings burn out when they touch the soul stone. But, humans. Humans are different. Marcus tried to drop the gem, but his fingers wouldn't respond. The crystal seemed fused to his glove, or perhaps his hand, in ways that defied explanation. Panic began to set in as he realized he couldn't let go of the thing. Different how? What makes humans special? The statue's mouth twisted into what might have been a smile, if stone could express such concepts. Your kind does not simply burn when exposed to pure essence. You adapt. You change. You become more than what you were. It is what makes your soul so nourishing. Around the chamber, the other statues began to stir. Marcus counted at least a dozen of them, all turning their glowing eyes in his direction. The carvings on their bodies pulsed with increasing intensity, creating a strobe effect that made it hard to focus on any one creature. "We are the Vorthak," the lead statue continued, its voice now joined by a chorus of others as they awakened. "We were old when your son was young. We have fed on the essence of 1,000 species, but none so satisfying as yours. The humans who came before provided us with centuries of sustenance." "Others?" Marcus's voice cracked. "Other humans have been here?" "Oh yes," the Vorthak leader said, floating closer. "They came in their great ships, seeking knowledge and treasures. They found us instead. Their light burned so brightly as we consumed them. But that was long ago. We had begun to fear your species had perished entirely." Marcus backed against the dais, his mind racing. His comm unit was still active, maybe he could warn the ship, tell them to stay away. But, even as he reached for the device, he realized it was too late. The gem in his hand was affecting his equipment, causing displays to flicker and sensors to give contradictory readings. He was on his own. "What do you want with me?" he asked, trying to buy time while he figured out his options. "We told you," the Vorthak said, their voices creating a harmony that seemed to resonate in his bones. "We hunger. And you carry the light we crave. But, first, you must ripen." "Ripen?" The statue gestured to the gem in Marcus's hand, and he felt the crystal's energy surge through his body. It wasn't painful, exactly, but it was overwhelming. He could feel something changing inside him, some fundamental alteration taking place at the cellular level. The gem was doing something to him, preparing him for whatever the Vorthak had planned. "The soulstone will awaken the potential in your essence," the lead creature explained. "It will make you more than human. Stronger. Faster. More aware. But also more flavorful." Marcus felt strength flowing into his limbs, power he'd never experienced before. His vision sharpened until he could see individual grains in the stone walls. His hearing became so acute that he could detect the Vorthak's movements even when they tried to approach silently. But, along with the enhancements came a growing sense of dread. Whatever was happening to him, it was preparing him to be food for these creatures. "How long?" he asked. "How long before you harvest me?" "Time is different for being such ASUS, the Vorthak replied. "Perhaps hours. Perhaps days. The transformation must be complete before we can feed. But, do not despair, little human. The process is educational." Marcus looked around the chamber, cataloging his options. The entrance he'd used was blocked by 3 of the Vorthak. The ceiling was too high to reach, even with his enhanced abilities. But there had to be another way out. Ancient temples were rarely built with only one entrance, especially ones designed to trap prey. "Tell me something," Marcus said, his tactical mind beginning to work despite the fear. "If you've been here for so long, how are you still active? What powers this place?" The Vorthak leader paused, tilting its massive head. "Curious question from food. The temple draws power from the planet's core, and from the essence of those we have consumed. Their light continues to fuel us long after their flesh has been absorbed." Marcus filed that information away. If the temple was powered by the planet's geothermal energy, there might be conduits or shafts that led to the surface. And if the Vorthak were powered by consumed essence, they might have weaknesses related to that dependence. He was a prospector, trained to analyze geological formations and energy patterns. Maybe he could use that knowledge to survive. The humans who came before, he said, still buying time. What were they like? How did they fight you? They did not, the Vorthak said with what sounded like amusement. They were scholars and explorers. Peaceful beings who sought to understand us. Their curiosity made them easy prey. But, you are different. There is a hardness in your essence. A will to survive that burns brighter than mere curiosity. Marcus almost smiled despite the situation. The Vorthak were right about one thing: he wasn't a scholar. He was a survivor, someone who'd made his living in the harsh environment of space by being tougher and more resourceful than the dangers he faced. If these creatures expected him to stand still while they prepared him for dinner, they were going to be disappointed. The gem in his hand pulsed again, and Marcus felt another wave of change wash through his body. His muscles expanded, his bones became denser, and his mind began processing information at a speed that would have been impossible minutes before. But, most importantly, he began to understand the nature of the energy flowing through him. It wasn't just power, it was information. The gem was a repository of knowledge accumulated over eons, and, as it changed him, it was also teaching him. He learned that the Vorthak weren't truly stone creatures, they were energy beings that had bound themselves to mineral matrices for protection. He discovered that the temple wasn't just a trap, but a complex machine designed to process and store the essence of living beings. And, most crucially, he realized that the transformation the gem was causing wasn't irreversible. If he could understand the process well enough, he might be able to control it. Something's wrong, one of the other Vorthak said, its voice carrying a note of concern that cut through the chamber's oppressive atmosphere. The human's essence is not following the expected patterns. Marcus felt a surge of hope. Whatever was happening to him, it wasn't what the Vorthak had planned. Maybe his human adaptability was working in ways they hadn't anticipated. He needed to keep them talking while he figured out how to use his new abilities. What's supposed to happen? He asked, genuinely curious despite the danger. Your essence should be expanding, becoming more accessible for feeding, the lead Vorthak explained, but its voice carried uncertainty now. Instead, it appears to be consolidating. Becoming more concentrated and difficult to extract. Marcus grinned. That sounded like a very human response to danger. Instead of becoming easier prey, he was becoming harder to catch. The gem continued to pulse in his hand, and, with each beat, he felt more in control of the changes happening to his body. He was beginning to understand that the crystal wasn't just changing him randomly, it was responding to his will and his need to survive. The Vorthak began to move closer, their stone forms grinding against each other as they positioned themselves around the chamber. Marcus could sense their hunger, a psychic pressure that tried to overwhelm his mind. But, his enhanced consciousness pushed back, creating a barrier of will that surprised both him and his captors. Interesting, the lead creature mused. Perhaps we should begin the feeding process before the transformation completes. Your species continues to surprise us with its adaptability. Marcus raised his rifle again, though he was no longer sure he needed it. The gem had done more than enhance his physical capabilities, it had awakened something in his mind that felt vast and dangerous. He could sense the temple's structure around him like a three-dimensional map, complete with hidden passages and energy conduits. More importantly, he could feel the Vorthak's connection to the temple's power system, and that connection looked suspiciously like a weakness he could exploit. Before you try to eat me, Marcus said, his voice carrying new confidence, you might want to consider that humans don't just adapt to survive. We adapt to fight back. The Vorthak paused, their glowing eyes focusing on him with what might have been concern. In that moment of hesitation, Marcus acted. He didn't run toward the blocked entrance or try to climb toward the unreachable ceiling. Instead, he placed his free hand on the dais where the gem had been floating and reached out with his enhanced consciousness toward the temple's power grid. The moment Marcus connected with the temple's power grid, the world exploded into new dimensions of sensation. Information flowed through his consciousness like liquid fire, revealing the true scope of what he was facing. The temple wasn't just a building, it was a vast organism of stone and energy that extended deep into the planet's crust. And it was hungry in ways that transcended mere appetite. Through his enhanced connection, Marcus could perceive the Vorthack's true nature. They weren't individual creatures but fragments of a single, ancient consciousness that had been shattered eons ago during some cosmic catastrophe. The stone forms they inhabited were protective shells, but their true existence was in the energy realm where thoughts had weight and could reshape reality. They fed not just on life essence but on the complex patterns of consciousness itself, particularly the unique neural structures that made each species think and dream in their own way. Impossible, the lead Vorthack hissed, its voice now carrying overtones of alarm. No prey has ever accessed the temple's core systems. The safeguards should prevent. Humans aren't really known for following the rules, Marcus interrupted, his voice resonating with harmonics that hadn't been there moments before. The gem in his hand was no longer just changing him, it was amplifying his connection to the temple's vast network of power conduits and data streams. Through that connection, he could feel the accumulated consciousness of every being the Vorthack had consumed over the millennia. The sensation was overwhelming. Thousands of minds, maybe millions, all crying out from within the temple's energy matrix where their essence had been stored and processed. Most were alien to him, their thought patterns so different from human cognition that they registered only as discordant noise. But scattered among them were others, minds that felt familiar in their structure and desperation. The humans who had come before him weren't gone. They were trapped, aware, and suffering. "You bastards," Marcus growled, his anger causing fluctuations in the temple's power grid that made the Vorthack retreat slightly. "They're still conscious in there. All of them. You didn't just kill them, you turned them into living batteries." Efficient design, the lead Vorthack acknowledged without shame. Consciousness continues to generate usable energy long after the flesh expires. Your predecessors have been invaluable in maintaining our systems during the long years of waiting. Marcus reached deeper into the temple's network, following data streams that led to the processing chambers where consumed essence was stored. What he found there made his enhanced mind reel with horror and rage. The trapped consciousnesses weren't just providing power, they were being tormented, their emotional responses harvested like crops. Fear, pain, despair, and false hope were cycled through them in endless repetition, each emotion generating specific types of psychic energy that the Vorthack required for different purposes. But, among all that suffering, Marcus detected something unexpected. The human consciousnesses had been working together, using their unique adaptability to slowly corrupt the very systems meant to contain them. They'd created hidden networks within the temple's architecture, pathways of thought that the Vorthack couldn't perceive because they thought in such fundamentally different ways. The trapped humans had been preparing for this moment, waiting for someone like Marcus to provide the connection they needed to act. "Cease your investigation immediately," the lead Vorthack commanded, its stone form beginning to glow with increasing intensity. "Your interference with temple systems will not be tolerated." "Too late," Marcus said, feeling the presence of his fellow humans stirring within the temple's core. "You made a mistake keeping them conscious. Humans don't just adapt to survive, we adapt to resist. And we've had a long time to figure out how to break your toys." The first sign that something was wrong came when the chamber's lighting began to flicker. The steady illumination that had revealed the temple's details started strobing in patterns that hurt the Vorthack's energy-based perception. Marcus could feel them recoiling, their connection to the temple's systems disrupted by interference they couldn't understand or counter. Through his link with the trapped minds, Marcus learned the truth about human consciousness that the Vorthack had never grasped. Where other species thought in linear patterns or rigid hierarchies, human minds were chaos engines, capable of holding contradictory ideas, processing multiple possibilities simultaneously, and creating novel solutions from seemingly incompatible elements. This neurological flexibility was what allowed humans to survive the gem's transformation where others burned out. But it also made them inherently subversive to any system designed to contain and control consciousness. "What are they doing?" one of the other Vorthack demanded, its voice carrying static as the chamber's systems continued to malfunction. "The power flows are becoming erratic." Marcus grinned, feeling strength pouring into him from sources the Vorthack couldn't access. The trapped human consciousness weren't just disrupting the temple's systems, they were redirecting its vast energies toward him, turning him into a conduit for their accumulated will to escape. The gem in his hand blazed with light that was no longer alien but distinctly human in its chaotic beauty. "They're doing what humans do best," Marcus said, his voice now carrying the harmonized will of thousands. "They're improvising." The chamber shook as deep systems began to overload. Marcus could perceive the temple's structure through his enhanced senses, watching as carefully balanced energy flows were diverted and reconfigured by the hidden human network. Power meant to feed the Vortex was being rerouted to unlock containment systems that had held for millennia. The ancient consciousness that had built this place as a trap was discovering that its prey had turned it into their weapon. "Impossible," the lead Vortex screamed, its stone form beginning to crack as power fluctuations damaged its protective shell. "The containment protocols were designed by beings far superior to your primitive species." "Maybe," Marcus acknowledged, feeling more of himself awakening as the human network continued to channel energy through him. "But they didn't understand what makes humans dangerous. We don't think like you. We don't follow your patterns. And, when you try to contain us, we find ways to break free that you never considered." The gem in his hand pulsed, and, suddenly, Marcus could see beyond the physical realm into the energy dimensions where the Vortex truly existed. They appeared as writhing knots of dark force, bound together by structures of crystallized thought that were beautiful and terrible in their complexity. But those structures were rigid, designed for stability and control. They couldn't adapt to the chaotic patterns that human consciousness was introducing into their carefully ordered system. Through the network, Marcus felt the other humans guiding him, showing him how to use his unique position as a living conduit to do something no trapped consciousness could accomplish alone. He was their hands in the physical world, their voice in the energy realm, and their weapon against the creatures that had tormented them for so long. "Let me show you something," Marcus said, raising the gem toward the largest Vortex. "This is what humans call improvisation." He opened his enhanced mind completely, letting the chaotic patterns of human thought flow through the temple's systems without any attempt to control or direct them. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Systems designed to process orderly consciousness found themselves flooded with the random, contradictory, endlessly creative patterns that made human minds unique. Safeguards failed. Processing algorithms crashed. The careful balance that had maintained the temple for eons collapsed in a cascade of errors that no non-human intelligence could have predicted. The Vortex screamed in harmonies that shattered stone, their forms beginning to dissolve as the energy matrices that sustained them were corrupted by patterns they couldn't understand. But Marcus felt no satisfaction in their destruction, only the urgent need to complete what the trapped humans had started. "The containment chambers," he said, speaking to minds that existed only in the temple's data streams. "Show me how to release everyone." Guidance flowed through him, knowledge accumulated by humans who had spent subjective centuries learning the temple's weaknesses. Marcus followed their instructions, using his connection to the power grid to trigger release sequences that had been hidden within the temple's own diagnostic systems. The Vortex had been so confident in their superiority that they'd never imagined their prey might understand their technology well enough to subvert it from within. The chamber filled with light as containment fields throughout the temple began to fail. Marcus could feel the trapped consciousnesses stirring, preparing for freedom they'd thought would never come. But he could also sense that something was wrong. The release process was requiring more energy than the template's systems could provide, and the human network was starting to burn out from the strain of coordinating such a massive operation. "Warning," the temple's automated systems announced in a voice like grinding stone. "Catastrophic system failure detected. Containment breach imminent. Initiating emergency protocols." "What emergency protocols?" Marcus demanded, but the surviving Vortex were too busy trying to maintain their coherence to answer. The lead creature's stone form was cracking apart, revealing the writhing energy patterns underneath. When it spoke, its voice was barely recognizable. "Auto-destruct," it managed to say. "If containment fails, temple destroys itself. Prevents spread of corrupted patterns." Marcus felt ice in his veins despite the power flowing through him. If the temple destroyed itself, it would take the planet with it. The amount of energy stored in the core systems was sufficient to crack the world's crust and turn the surface into molten slag. All the trapped consciousness would die, along with any hope of rescue for his crew in orbit. But, even as despair threatened to overwhelm him, Marcus felt the human network responding with characteristic stubbornness. They weren't going to let their captors win through suicide. If the Vorthack wanted to destroy everything rather than face defeat, then the humans would have to become something their enemies couldn't destroy. There's another way, one of the trapped minds communicated, its thoughts carrying the weight of centuries of planning. The temple's power core can be reconfigured. Instead of destruction, we can use it to break free of this reality entirely. What do you mean? Marcus asked, even as he felt countdown sequences initiating throughout the temple. The Vorthack exist partially outside normal spacetime, the consciousness explained. The temple is designed to access those higher dimensions where thought becomes reality. If we can redirect that capability, we can pull all the trapped minds into a stable pocket universe where the Vorthack can't follow. Marcus understood immediately. It was insane, impossible, and exactly the kind of desperate gamble that humans specialized in. How long do we have? 97 seconds until core detonation, another mind replied. But, the reconfiguration will require someone to remain behind to complete the process manually. For a moment, Marcus hesitated. He'd come to this temple looking for treasure, not martyrdom. But, as he felt the desperation and hope of thousands of trapped souls flowing through the network, he realized there was no choice. These people had suffered for millennia because they'd been unlucky enough to encounter the Vorthack. He couldn't abandon them now, not when they were so close to freedom. Tell me what to do, he said, already moving toward the power control systems that the human network was highlighting in his enhanced vision. First, you need to stabilize the dimensional anchor points, the lead consciousness instructed. The template exists in 17 different layers of reality. We need to collapse all of them into a single pocket dimension that can exist independently. Marcus placed his hands on what looked like a simple stone panel, but which his enhanced senses revealed as an incredibly complex multidimensional control interface. Energy flowed through him into the temple's core systems, beginning the process of reality manipulation that the Vorthack had used to create their trap in the first place. 63 seconds, another mind announced. The chamber around Marcus began to change as dimensional barriers started to collapse. Walls became translucent, revealing layer upon layer of reality stacked like pages in an infinite book. Through some layers, he could see the temple as it had been when first built, pristine and new. Through others, he glimpsed possible futures where the structure had crumbled to dust. But, in all of them, he could see the trapped consciousness struggling to break free. Now redirect the core's output, the guiding mind instructed. Instead of explosive release, we need controlled dimensional separation. Marcus adjusted the flow patterns, feeling reality shift around him like a living thing. The countdown continued, but he could sense the destructive potential of the core being channeled into something else, a fundamental alteration of the temple's relationship with normal spacetime. 30 seconds. Almost there, Marcus said, sweat beading on his forehead despite the environmental suit's climate control. But, I'm not sure I can complete the separation sequence remotely. You can't, the consciousness confirmed. Someone has to remain at the controls until the pocket dimension stabilizes. The process will take approximately 47 seconds after dimensional separation begins. And, the auto-destruct? Will trigger in 34 seconds. Marcus's first sensation in his new existence was the absence of heartbeat. Where once the steady rhythm of blood through his veins had provided an unconscious backdrop to every moment, now there was something else, a pulse of pure thought and energy that connected him to thousands of other consciousness in their shared pocket universe. He was no longer flesh, no longer bound by the physical laws that had governed his entire life, but somehow he was still recognizably himself. The pocket universe took shape around them like a lucid dream given substance. Where the Vorthack's temple had been all dark stone and oppressive weight, the humans created something that felt like home. Rolling green hills stretched to horizons that curved impossibly upward, dotted with structures that combined architectural styles from every human civilization. Cities of light and crystal rose from valleys filled with gardens that bloomed in colors that had no names, while overhead, 3 suns traced lazy paths across a sky that sometimes showed familiar constellations and sometimes revealed the swirling energies that were the true substance of their realm. "Welcome to freedom," said Elena Vasquez, the consciousness that had first guided Marcus through the temple's systems. She appeared before him as she chose to be seen, a woman in her 30s with the bearing of someone who had never quite given up hope, despite decades of imprisonment. "It takes some getting used to, but existence here has certain advantages over the flesh." Marcus looked down at his own form, surprised to find that he still appeared human. "How is this possible?" "I felt myself dissolve, become pure energy." "You did," Elena confirmed, gesturing to the landscape around them. "We all did. But consciousness creates its own reality here. We exist as patterns of organized thought and will, but those patterns can take any form we choose. Most of us prefer to maintain human appearances and familiar environments. It helps preserve our sanity." As if to demonstrate her point, Elena's form shifted slightly. For a moment, she appeared as she truly was, a complex geometric structure of crystallized thought, beautiful and alien. Then, she resumed her human appearance with a smile that was both sad and triumphant. "The Vortak never understood that consciousness isn't just thought," she explained. "It's memory, emotion, identity, and the connections between minds. When they stored us as pure information, they preserved everything that makes us who we are. They just didn't realize we could use that preservation to become something they couldn't control." Marcus tested his new existence, willing himself to float above the ground. The sensation was effortless, as natural as walking had been in his flesh. "How many of us are here?" 47,312, replied another consciousness, manifesting as an elderly man with the precise manner of someone who had spent a lifetime with numbers. "I'm Dr. Jameson, by the way. Xenobiologist from the first human expedition to encounter the Vortak. I've been keeping track of everyone as they've arrived over the centuries." Marcus felt a chill despite his energy-based existence. "Centuries? How long have some of you been trapped?" "I was captured 437 years ago," Dr. Jameson said matter-of-factly. "Elena here has been with us for 212 years. The newest arrivals before you were a family of asteroid miners who stumbled onto a Vortak feeding station 63 years ago. But time works differently here," Elena added, seeing Marcus's expression of horror. "We experience duration, but not aging or decay. The consciousness we trapped at the moment of capture, so in many ways we're exactly as we were when we died. Except now we have the ability to grow and change in ways that flesh never allowed." Marcus processed this information, feeling the vast network of human consciousness around him. Each mind was distinct, maintaining its individual identity while also being part of a greater whole. It was unlike anything the Vortak had created in their energy matrices. Instead of being stored and processed, the humans had formed a genuine collective that enhanced rather than diminished their individual selves. "What about the physical universe?" Marcus asked. "My crew, my ship, are they still out there?" "Oh yes," Elena said, her expression growing serious. "Time flows differently here, but we maintain quantum connections to normal spacetime. Your friends are searching for you right now. As far as they're concerned, you've been missing for about 6 hours." Marcus felt relief wash through him, followed immediately by concern. "They'll come looking for me." "If there are more Vortak temples, more traps." "There are," Dr. Jameson confirmed grimly. "Hundreds of them, scattered across this galaxy and others. The Vortak were an ancient species, and they built their feeding stations wherever they found suitable prey. Humanity has been expanding into their hunting grounds for centuries without realizing the danger. Then, we have to warn them," Marcus said, his consciousness flaring with determination. "There has to be a way to communicate across the dimensional barrier." Elena and Dr. Jameson exchanged a look that carried the weight of centuries of frustrated effort. "We've been trying for as long as we've been here," Elena said. "The quantum entanglement connections are too weak for direct communication. We can observe, but we can't affect the physical realm directly." "At least, we couldn't before," Dr. Jameson added, his scholarly manner becoming excited. But your arrival has changed something fundamental about our situation. When you initiated the dimensional separation, you created a unique bridge between our realm and normal spacetime. For the first time since our imprisonment began, we might actually be able to influence events in the physical universe. Marcus felt a surge of hope. How? Come with us, Elena said, beginning to move across the impossible landscape of their pocket universe. There's something you need to see. They traveled by will rather than walking, crossing distances that would have taken hours in the physical world in moments. The landscape flowed and changed around them as different groups of consciousness shaped their local environments. Marcus saw recreations of Earth cities from across history, alien settlements that humans had visited during their expansion into space, and entirely new environments born from pure imagination. But their destination was unlike anything else in the pocket universe. At what might have been the center of their realm, if such concepts applied here, stood a structure that was clearly not human in design. It was a sphere of crystallized thought, similar to what Marcus had seen when Elena briefly showed her true form, but vastly larger and more complex. Energy flowed through it in patterns that hurt to look at directly, even with his enhanced consciousness. The Nexus, Dr. Jameson explained. When we first gained the ability to shape our environment, we discovered this already existed here. It's not Vorthak in origin, it's something much older, a remnant from whatever created the pocket dimensions the Vorthak used for their temples. It's a universal interface, Elena added. A way to connect consciousness directly to the fundamental forces that shape reality. The Vorthak used it to process and store their prey, but they never understood what it truly was. They thought it was just another tool for controlling energy flows. Marcus approached the Nexus, feeling its power resonating with his own transformed existence. What can it do? We're not entirely sure, Dr. Jameson admitted. But we've learned that it responds to human thought patterns in ways it never did for the Vorthak. Your unique neural flexibility, the same trait that allowed you to survive the temple's transformation, seems to unlock capabilities that other species can't access. Elena gestured to the energy patterns flowing through the crystalline structure. We think it might be a form of technology created by the first consciousness to achieve what we have, beings that transcended physical existence entirely and became pure thought. If we're right, then it might be capable of far more than just dimensional manipulation. Such as? Marcus asked, though part of him was already beginning to understand. Rewriting the laws of physics, Dr. Jameson said. At least in localized areas. The Nexus doesn't just store and process consciousness, it can use organized thought to alter the fundamental forces that govern reality. Marcus stared at the impossible structure, feeling its power calling to something deep in his transformed consciousness. You're saying this thing could let us fight back against the Vorthak? Not just escape from them, but actually destroy their entire system. More than that, Elena said, her voice carrying a note of awe that 4 centuries of existence hadn't diminished. If we can learn to use it properly, we might be able to protect every human in the galaxy. No more traps, no more feeding stations, no more consciousness lost to those parasites. But, even as she spoke, alarms began to sound through the pocket universe, not audible warnings, but shifts in the quantum patterns that connected them to normal spacetime. Marcus felt the disturbance instantly, a wrongness that made his energy-based form resonate with harmonics of danger. What's happening? He asked. Dr. Jameson's face had gone pale. Your ship, he said, consulting readouts that existed only in his consciousness. They're approaching another Vorthak installation. A much larger one than the temple where you were captured. Marcus felt ice in his non-existent veins. Where? The 4th moon of the gas giant you're orbiting, Elena said, her own consciousness reaching out through the quantum connections to observe the physical realm. Your crew has detected an artificial structure there and they're planning to investigate. They think it might be connected to your disappearance. Through the network that connected all human consciousness in the pocket universe, Marcus could feel the collective alarm spreading. Thousands of minds turned their attention to the developing crisis, watching helplessly as history prepared to repeat itself. His friends and crew members were about to walk into a trap that would make the temple look like a minor hazard. How long do we have? Marcus asked, already moving toward the Nexus with grim determination. They'll reach the installation in approximately 4 hours, Dr. Jameson reported. But, Marcus, you can't possibly learn to use the Nexus safely in that time. We've been studying it for centuries and we still don't understand all its capabilities. Then, I'll have to figure it out as I go, Marcus said, placing his consciousness in direct contact with the crystalline structure. The moment he touched it, power beyond imagination flowed through him, not just energy, but the ability to perceive and manipulate the quantum threads that connected all existence. He could see the pocket universe from an entirely new perspective, understanding how it related to the normal spacetime from which they'd been severed. More importantly, he could see the pathways back. There, he said, pointing to patterns in the Nexus's energy flow that were invisible to the others. Those quantum entanglements don't just connect us to normal spacetime, they can be strengthened, turned into actual gateways. If I can amplify them using the Nexus's power, I might be able to project some of our consciousness back into the physical realm. Elena stared at the patterns Marcus was indicating. That's impossible. The energy requirements alone would be astronomical. Not if we all work together, Marcus said, his enhanced understanding revealing possibilities that centuries of careful study had missed. Every human consciousness in the pocket universe, linked through the Nexus, focusing on a single goal. We wouldn't be trying to return to physical existence just to project enough presence to warn my crew and help them avoid the trap. And, if it doesn't work? Dr. Jameson asked. Marcus looked around at the thousands of consciousness that had begun to gather, drawn by the discussion and the possibility of action after so many years of helplessness. Each of them had lost everything to the Vortex, their lives, their dreams, their connections to the universe they'd known. But they'd also gained something their captors had never understood, the ability to act together in ways that individual flesh could never achieve. Then, we try something else, Marcus said. But we don't just sit here and watch more humans die. Not when we finally have the power to fight back. Elena smiled, and, for the first time since his transformation, Marcus saw genuine hope in her expression. All right, she said. But, if we're going to attempt something this insane, we'll need everyone working together. Every consciousness in the pocket universe, linked through the Nexus, acting as a single entity. Can it be done? Marcus asked. We're about to find out, Dr. Jameson said, already reaching out through the collective network to organize the greatest cooperative effort in human history. If it works, we'll be able to project a unified consciousness into normal spacetime with enough power to affect physical reality. If it fails. It won't fail, Marcus said with certainty he didn't entirely feel. Humans don't know how to give up. The Vortex learned that the hard way, and so will anyone else who tries to prey on us. Around the Nexus, 47,312 human consciousness began to link together, their individual thoughts and will combining into something greater than the sum of its parts. Marcus felt their combined determination flowing through him, their shared resolve to protect their species from the ancient evil that had tormented them for so long. The Vortex had made a fatal error when they'd chosen to keep human consciousness intact for their feeding purposes. They'd preserved not just the individuals they'd captured, but the essential human traits that made them dangerous to any system that tried to contain them. Adaptability, creativity, and the stubborn refusal to accept defeat, these qualities didn't disappear when flesh became energy. If anything, they became more potent when freed from physical limitations. Initiating collective link, Dr. Jameson announced, his consciousness merging with the growing network of human will. All stations report ready for quantum projection. Marcus placed both hands on the Nexus, feeling the power of every human consciousness flowing through him toward the crystalline structure. The energy was incredible, like holding a star in his bare hands, but it was also familiar. This was what humans had always been capable of when they worked together, the power to reshape reality through sheer stubborn determination. Project now, Elena called out, adding her will to the vast collective effort. The Nexus flared with light that existed in dimensions human eyes had never seen, and Marcus felt the combined consciousness of his species reach across the dimensional barrier toward the physical realm where their friends and family still lived and died. The quantum entanglement pathways strengthened and widened, becoming genuine gateways between realities. For the first time in centuries, human consciousness touched normal spacetime with the power to change it. And, in the depths of space, aboard a small prospecting vessel approaching an ancient trap, warning signs began to appear that would save lives and change the course of galactic history. Commander Sarah Walsh stared at the tactical display with growing unease as her ship, the Meridian, approached the fourth moon of Kepler 442c. The structure they detected on the surface was massive, easily 10 times larger than the temple where Marcus had disappeared, and it was clearly artificial. But more disturbing were the energy readings that defied every known law of physics. "Status report," she called out to her crew, her voice steady despite the knot of dread growing in her stomach. "Surface scans confirm multiple artificial structures," reported Lieutenant Torres from the sensor station. "The main complex appears to extend at least 15 kilometers underground, with power signatures that don't match any known technology." "Any sign of Marcus?" Walsh asked, though she already knew the answer from Torres's expression. "Negative. But, Commander, the energy patterns here are almost identical to what we detected at the temple site. Whatever happened to Marcus, this place might have answers." Walsh nodded grimly. Marcus Chen had been her friend for over a decade, ever since they'd served together in the Colonial Defense Force. When he decided to become an independent prospector, she'd thought he was crazy to go it alone in the dangerous Outer Rim. But he'd always been lucky, always managed to find the valuable deposits that other teams missed. Until yesterday. "Dr. Yates," she called to the team's xenoarchaeologist. "What's your assessment?" The elderly scientist looked up from his analysis station, his face pale. "Commander, this isn't just a larger version of what we found on the planet's surface. The architectural patterns, the energy distribution systems, this is what the smaller structure was connected to. I think we've found the main installation of whatever species built these places." "Recommendations?" "We should contact the Science Corps and request a full archaeological team," Yates said immediately. "This site could rewrite our understanding of galactic history. The technology here appears to be millions of years old, but it's still active." Walsh considered the options. Standard protocol would indeed be to report the discovery and wait for backup. But Marcus was still missing, and every hour that passed reduced the chances of finding him alive. If there were answers to be found, she couldn't wait for bureaucrats to authorize an expedition that might take months to organize. "We'll make a preliminary investigation," she decided. "Full environmental suits, maximum precautions. If this is connected to what happened to Marcus, we need to know." As her crew prepared for the surface mission, Walsh couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The ship's sensors showed no other vessels in the system, no signs of intelligent life anywhere in their vicinity. But something about the alien structure below made her feel like a mouse approaching a cat's den. 2 hours later, Walsh found herself standing before an entrance that made her think of a massive mouth filled with crystalline teeth. The structure was built from the same dark stone as the temple where Marcus had vanished, but here the architecture was far more complex. Spires twisted toward the sky in patterns that hurt to look at directly, while energy conduits visible through the translucent walls pulsed with lights that shifted through colors that had no names. "Energy readings are off the charts," reported Dr. Yates, consulting his portable scanner. "Whatever powers this place is operating at near maximum capacity. It's as if the entire complex is waiting for something. Or someone," Walsh muttered, remembering Marcus's last transmission. He'd mentioned finding something valuable, a gem of some kind, before the signal had cut out. Now she wondered if he'd triggered some kind of automated system by removing whatever he'd found. The entrance dilated open as they approached, revealing a corridor that stretched into darkness. Emergency lighting activated automatically, casting airy shadows on walls covered with intricate carvings. Unlike the temple's simple pictographs, these murals were incredibly detailed, showing scenes that told a coherent story across dozens of panels. "My God," Dr. Yates breathed, running his hand over the nearest carving. "This depicts the entire life cycle of some kind of energy-based species. Look here, they're shown feeding on other life forms, but not physically. They're consuming something else, some kind of essence or consciousness." Walsh studied the images with growing alarm. The creatures in the carvings were clearly the builders of this place, and they were shown harvesting other beings in ways that made her skin crawl. But what disturbed her most were the human figures scattered throughout the later panels. Humans who looked exactly like modern people, dressed in environmental suits identical to the ones her team was wearing. These carvings show humans, she said. But they're integrated into what looks like a historical record spanning thousands of years. How is that possible? Before Dr. Yates could answer, the air around them began to shimmer. Walsh's hand moved instinctively to her weapon, but what materialized before them wasn't a threat. It was Marcus, or at least a translucent image of him that flickered in and out of visibility like a holographic projection. "Sarah," Marcus said, his voice carrying strange harmonics that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Thank God you can see me. You have to get out of here now. This whole place is a trap." "Marcus!" Walsh stepped toward the apparition, but her hand passed right through him. "Where are you? What happened to you?" "It's complicated," Marcus replied, his image stabilizing slightly. "I'm alive, but not in any way you'd recognize. The important thing is that you're in immediate danger. This installation is designed to capture and process consciousness. If you go any deeper, you'll end up like me." Dr. Yates was frantically scanning the apparition with every instrument he had. "Commander, this isn't a hologram. The readings suggest some kind of quantum projection, but from where? The energy source would have to be enormous." "From about 47,000 human consciousness working together," Marcus said, his expression grim. "We're projecting across dimensional barriers to warn you. Sarah, you have to believe me, every step deeper into this place increases the danger. The creatures that built it are still here, and they're hungry." As if summoned by his words, the walls around them began to change. The dark stone became translucent, revealing chambers beyond filled with floating crystalline structures. And, within those crystals, Walsh could see shapes that looked disturbingly like human figures, suspended in some kind of energy field. "Those are the other humans who found this place," Marcus said, following her gaze. "Explorers, scientists, prospectors like me. The creatures here, they call themselves the Vorthak, feed on consciousness itself. They keep their prey alive and aware, harvesting emotional and psychic energy indefinitely." "That's impossible," Torres protested. "Consciousness can't be stored or harvested. It's not a physical process. The Vorthak discovered ways to make it physical millions of years ago," Marcus replied. "They built installations like this throughout the galaxy, each one designed to lure intelligent species into traps. The gem I found was bait, programmed to attract beings capable of advanced thought." Walsh felt cold despite her environmental suit's heating systems. "How many of these places are there?" "Hundreds, maybe thousands. The Vorthak were patient hunters, willing to wait millennia between feedings if necessary. But they made a mistake when they tried to process human consciousness. Our minds work differently than any other species they'd encountered. Instead of being consumed, we adapted." The projection of Marcus gestured to the crystalline chambers visible through the walls. "Every human they captured is still aware, still fighting back in ways they can't understand or control. We've been working together across centuries of captivity, learning to subvert their systems from within. What you're seeing now is the result, 47,000 human consciousness acting as one to protect our species." Dr. Yates looked up from his scanners, his face pale. "Commander, the energy signatures are spiking. Something's activating deeper in the complex." "The Vorthak know you're here," Marcus confirmed urgently. "They're preparing the harvesting systems. You have maybe 10 minutes before this corridor becomes a processing chamber designed to strip consciousness from flesh. Get back to your ship now." "We're not leaving you," Walsh said firmly. "There has to be a way to get you out of there." Marcus smiled, and, for a moment his projection became so clear that he looked almost solid. "Sarah, I'm not trapped anymore. We found a way to break free from the Vorthak's control, to exist independently of their systems. But that freedom comes with responsibilities. We can't return to normal spacetime, but we can protect others from suffering the same fate we did." Around them, the installation began to emit a low humming sound that seemed to resonate in their bones. The crystalline structures in the walls pulsed brighter, and Walsh could see mechanical systems activating throughout the complex. Whatever the Vorthak were preparing, it was big enough to power a small city. The harvesting process is beginning, Marcus said, his urgency increasing. Once it reaches full activation, your ship won't be able to escape the gravitational effects. The Vorthak use localized spacetime distortions to prevent prey from fleeing. Walsh made a command decision. All teams, return to the ship immediately. Emergency evacuation protocol. Wait, Dr. Yates protested. This discovery could revolutionize our understanding of consciousness itself. We can't just abandon the research opportunity. The research opportunity involves becoming food for ancient parasites, Walsh snapped. Move. As her team began their hasty retreat, Walsh lingered for a moment, looking at Marcus's projection. Is this really the last time we'll see each other? Not if we succeed in what we're planning, Marcus said. We've learned to use the Vorthak's own technology against them. If we can gain control of enough installations, we might be able to create a permanent barrier that protects human space from their influence. Think of it as a cosmic immune system, powered by human stubbornness and spite. That sounds like you, Walsh said with a smile that was half sad and half proud. Always finding a way to turn disaster into opportunity. It's what we do best, Marcus agreed. Now go. And, Sarah, make sure the Colonial Council knows about this. Humanity needs to be warned about what's out here. The Vorthak have been patient for millions of years, but they're getting desperate. They'll become more aggressive in their hunting, more willing to take risks to capture human prey. Walsh nodded and turned to go, but Marcus called out once more. And, Sarah? Tell them that the humans who came before are still fighting. We haven't given up, and we never will. That's the real message here. No matter what tries to contain us, humans find a way to resist. As Walsh and her team raced back through the corridors toward their ship, the installation around them continued to activate. Energy fields crackled between the walls, and the air itself began to feel thick and oppressive. But Marcus's projection stayed with them, providing guidance and warnings that helped them avoid the worst of the Vorthak's automated defenses. Left turn ahead, Marcus called out as they approached a junction. The right passage leads to a processing chamber that's already active. You don't want to see what's in there. They followed his directions, trusting in his ability to perceive the installation's layout in ways they couldn't. Behind them, the corridors they'd traversed were sealing themselves, preventing retreat. The Vorthak were clearly determined not to let this prey escape. Ships in sight, Torres reported as they emerged from the installation. But, Commander, look at the readings. The gravitational effects are already beginning. Walsh could see it on her helmet's display. Spacetime around the installation was starting to warp, creating the kind of distortions that could trap a ship indefinitely. The Meridian was fighting against invisible forces that tried to drag it toward the surface, its engines straining against artificial gravity fields. Can we break free? She asked, knowing that Marcus would somehow hear her despite the fact that they were no longer in the installation. We're working on it, Marcus replied, his voice now coming through their comb systems rather than the air around them. The collective human consciousness is interfering with the Vorthak's control systems. We can't stop the gravitational effects entirely, but we can weaken them enough for you to escape. The team reached their ship and rushed through the airlock, not bothering with decontamination protocols. In the distance, the alien installation was beginning to glow with malevolent energy, its spires reaching toward space like grasping fingers. All hands, prepare for emergency departure, Walsh ordered as she reached the bridge. Maximum burn on all engines. We're leaving now. The Meridian strained against the artificial gravity well, its fusion engines pouring out enough energy to power a small colony. For a terrifying moment, it seemed like they wouldn't be able to break free. The ship shuddered and groaned as conflicting forces tore at its structure. Then, suddenly, the gravitational effects weakened. The ship lurched forward, breaking free of the installation's influence and racing toward open space. Behind them, the alien complex pulsed with frustrated energy, its automated systems cycling through sequences designed to prevent exactly what had just happened. "We're clear," Torres reported, his voice shaky with relief. "Whatever happened back there, it saved our lives." Walsh nodded, looking back at the dwindling installation through the viewports. "Marcus and the others," she said quietly. 47,000 human consciousness, all working together to protect us. Even death couldn't stop them from fighting for their species. On her personal comm channel, Marcus's voice came through one last time, faint but clear. "This is just the beginning, Sarah. We've learned things about the nature of consciousness and reality that will change everything. The Vorthak thought they were the ultimate predators, but they never encountered anything like human determination. We're going to turn their own tools against them and make sure no other species suffers what we did." "How can we help?" Walsh asked. "Warn everyone," Marcus replied, his signal growing weaker as distance increased. "And watch for the signs. When human consciousness starts appearing in places we shouldn't be able to exist, you'll know we're winning. The age of being prey is ending, Sarah. It's time for humanity to become the protectors of the galaxy." The signal faded, leaving Walsh alone with her thoughts and the staggering implications of what she'd witnessed. In her final log entry before jumping to hyperspace, she wrote, "We encountered evidence of an ancient threat to human consciousness itself. But we also discovered that human ingenuity and determination transcend even death. The battle for the galaxy's future has begun, and, for the first time in millions of years, the predators are about to become the prey." 6 months after the encounter at Kepler 442c, the galaxy had begun to change in ways that no one could have predicted. Commander Sarah Walsh stood in the briefing room of Starbase Omega, the Colonial Council's primary military installation, addressing an audience of admirals, scientists, and politicians who were struggling to comprehend the new reality humanity faced. The holographic display behind her showed a three-dimensional map of known space, with red markers indicating confirmed Vorthak installations and yellow markers showing sites where unusual quantum phenomena had been detected. The pattern was disturbing. The ancient feeding stations formed a loose network that surrounded human space like a noose, with some installations dating back millions of years. "Based on our investigations over the past 6 months," Walsh continued, "we've confirmed the existence of at least 347 Vorthak installations within 50 light-years of human colonies. Each one contains thousands of trapped consciousness from dozens of species, with human prisoners dating back as far as 4 centuries. Admiral Chen, no relation to Marcus, despite sharing the same surname, leaned forward in his chair. "And you're certain these consciousness are still active? Still capable of independent action?" "More than capable," Walsh confirmed. "They've been actively sabotaging Vorthak operations across the galaxy. Installation power grids have been failing, processing chambers have been mysteriously shutting down, and, in 3 confirmed cases, entire feeding stations have been rendered permanently inoperable." Dr. Elizabeth Reeves, the Council's chief xenobiologist, raised her hand. "Commander Walsh, I've reviewed your reports, but I'm still struggling with the fundamental premise. How can consciousness exist independently of neural substrate? Everything we know about biology suggests that awareness requires physical brains to process information." Walsh activated another display, showing energy pattern readings taken from the Kepler installation. "The Vorthak discovered something we're only beginning to understand. Consciousness isn't just an emergent property of complex neural networks. It's a fundamental force, like gravity or electromagnetism, that can exist independently under the right conditions. The aliens developed technology to capture and manipulate this force directly." "But that's impossible," protested Dr. Marcus Webb, the Council's chief physicist. "Consciousness isn't measurable in any meaningful way. It has no mass, no energy signature." "Actually, it does," interrupted a new voice from the back of the room. Everyone turned to see Dr. Yates walking forward, carrying a device that looked like a modified quantum scanner. "We've been working around the clock to understand the principles involved. Consciousness does have measurable properties, quantum entanglement patterns that extend beyond the physical brain into dimensional spaces we're only now learning to detect." Dr. Yates activated his device, and the air shimmered slightly. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to meet Marcus Chen." Marcus's translucent form appeared in the center of the briefing room, his image more stable than it had been during their first contact. The assembled officials stared in stunned silence as he smiled and raised his hand in a casual wave. "Hello, everyone," Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly through the room despite his non-physical nature. "Sorry to crash your meeting, but we have some urgent business to discuss." Admiral Chen found his voice first. "This is impossible. You're showing us a ghost, a holographic trick of some kind." "I'm showing you evolution," Marcus replied calmly. "What the Vorthak intended as a feeding process, humans turned into a form of transcendence. We exist now as pure consciousness, freed from the limitations of flesh but retaining everything that made us human. Including our tendency to fight back when someone tries to eat us." The room erupted in questions and protests, but Walsh raised her hand for silence. "Let him speak. Everything he told us about the Vorthak installations has proven accurate. If he says this is real, we need to listen." Marcus nodded gratefully. "Thank you, Sarah. The situation is more urgent than you realize. The Vorthak have noticed our interference with their operations, and they're adapting their strategies in response. Instead of waiting for prey to stumble into their traps, they're actively hunting now. 3 human settlements have reported unusual phenomena in the past week: ships and people disappearing without a trace, strange energy readings near known Vorthak sites." Marcus laughed despite himself. "So I've got 13 seconds to work with." "Typical." "There might be a way to survive," another mind interjected. "If you can merge completely with the temple's systems, become part of the energy matrix, you might be able to ride the dimensional shift. But the process would change you fundamentally. You wouldn't be human anymore, at least not in any way you recognize." "As opposed to being dead?" Marcus asked, making final adjustments to the control interface. "I'll take transformation over annihilation." 10 seconds, the countdown announced. Marcus took a deep breath, steadying himself for what was about to happen. Around him, the chamber was dissolving into pure energy as the dimensional barriers collapsed completely. He could see the Vorthak struggling to maintain coherence as their carefully structured reality turned to chaos. But he could also see something beautiful: thousands of human consciousness beginning to coalesce into a new form of existence, free from the physical constraints that had made them vulnerable in the first place. "Now," the guiding mind said. Marcus activated the dimensional separation sequence and felt reality tear apart around him. The pocket universe began to form, a bubble of spacetime that would contain all the freed consciousness in a realm where thought and will were the fundamental forces of reality. But even as the process began, he could feel the auto-destruct sequence reaching its climax. 5 seconds, the countdown announced. Without hesitation, Marcus opened his mind completely and let his consciousness flow into the temple's energy matrix. The process was agony and ecstasy combined: every thought, every memory, every aspect of his identity torn apart and reassembled as pure information. But, in that transformation, he felt the human network reaching out to catch him, to guide him through the transition from flesh to energy. 2 seconds. The auto-destruct triggered just as the dimensional separation completed. Destructive force that should have shattered a planet instead tore apart the fabric of reality, severing the pocket universe from normal spacetime and hurling it into dimensions where physics worked differently. The temple, the Vorthak, and everything connected to their reality was left behind in an expanding sphere of annihilation. But Marcus and the thousands of trapped consciousness survived, translated into beings of pure thought and, well, in a realm where human imagination was the only limiting factor on what they could become. The gem that had started his transformation dissolved into his new form, its power no longer needed now that he existed as living energy. In the last moment before full translation, Marcus felt his enhanced senses detecting his ship in orbit above the planet. Commander Walsh and his crew were watching the temple's explosion, believing he had died in some kind of catastrophic accident. He tried to reach out, to let them know he was alive, but the dimensional barriers were already too strong. His old reality was beyond his reach now. But, as consciousness stabilized in their new realm, Marcus felt something unexpected. The pocket universe wasn't isolated, it was connected to the normal universe through quantum entanglements that he didn't fully understand. And those connections meant that someday, when he learned to navigate his new existence, he might be able to reach back to the realm he'd left behind. The humans trapped in the temple hadn't just found freedom, they'd found a new way to exist that might let them help their species in ways the Vorthak could never have imagined.